Welcome to On Purpose Coaching, where we challenge you to do better on purpose. So good evening. Welcome to Enneagram'd on Purpose. Tonight, I'm going to be talking to my friend Jen. She is a type 6, our loyal guardians, the warriors. So we're going to hop right into it. I appreciate you joining me tonight. So first things first, tell us about who you are. Just what you do, what you've been doing these days during COVID craziness and everything. What does that look like for you?
Sure. I am a teacher by trade. I teach high school. So in quarantine, I actually found myself to be a little busier than usual, just keeping up with distance learning, while spending a lot of time with my family. So kind of soaking up extra time with my family that I wouldn't necessarily have otherwise. And also just trying to be in contact with a lot of my friends throughout that time as well.
Okay. Awesome. So, again, welcome. We're here tonight just to kind of talk through focusing on things like relationships and just some of your nuances about your type and about your number. So feel free to just any type of interaction as far as questions you might have for me or maybe some thoughts you might have, let me know, because I know usually there's more participants on, but that's okay. Tonight, we're going to have us a nice little intimate session. So that's going to be great. Don't worry about it.
Okay.
And let's dive right in. So like I said, the sixes, we love the sixes. Those are our best friends. Reliable, responsible, stable, connected, champion, and cooperative. And we need them for our teams. We need them to help us stay the course, but sometimes they can be the indecisive rebel. And that rebel comes from the countertype, which we're actually going to get into a little bit later. So motivations, though, that they have is to have clear direction and guidance. And fears is not being supported or being abandoned by others. So just looking at this brief description, what kind of resonates with you or what you thought resonated with you when you first learned about this was your type?
A few things, probably. I do feel like I'm reliable and responsible in a lot of ways. I tend to be a rule follower.
Oh, yeah.
But if I feel a certain way about something, I will definitely stand firm with that stance. Indecisiveness is one of my, I would say, weaknesses. In a lot of ways, I never want to make a decision, no matter how big or small, whether that be where we're going to eat dinner or am I going to move this year? I just don't want to make a decision ever. But I certainly feel like I'm loyal to all of the people in my life, and sometimes to a fault.
For sure. And that makes even sense. A couple of things you mentioned, like, not making decisions, and that's your number going to a 9, right?
Mm-hmm.
Pulling those traits from a 9 that just wants to do what everybody else is doing, where you just don't really care one way or the other. So again, becomes very helpful when we have those type of friends that kind of let us do what we want to do, especially if you're an 8 like me. You're like, great, because I wanted to do this anyway.
Right. I'll do whatever you want to do.
So it's like, we need friends like you that kind of help us in life, for sure. So things going into core motivations, where we talk about fears, desires, weaknesses, and longings. The 6, again, revered as being committed and responsible, faithful, sometimes suspicious because, again, of authority or trusting decisions made by others, which then leads to the anxiousness and the fearfulness. So fearing fear itself actually is the 6's core fear. And being without that support and that security and guidance, being blamed or targeted, being by themselves. And that's that physical abandonment that once that sets in, causes them to be very, very anxious. Because they long to be secure. You want guidance, you want support. And essentially you want to be safe from anything that could potentially harm you. And that weakness, though, that comes in with that hypervigilance, so to speak, is that you're constantly scanning the horizon for what could happen. We were just kind of talking about that a little bit before we got started. And well, this could happen or that could happen, or if all the stars aligned and this outcome could happen to me, and usually it's in a negative connotation. So they kind of, sixes remain in that constant state of apprehension and worry. Where do you find yourself in that? Like, is that something that, especially with your core weakness, that anxiety, scanning worst case scenarios, where do you find yourself in that cycle?
So I think first in thinking about where the fear of being alone, like quarantine was probably the best example of how that fear came out, right? You know that, I live by myself. And as soon as I found out we were getting that like stay in place order, it was immediately, how am I getting from my apartment to be with my family and staying there long term? Like I just,
you can't stay there long term.
but my biggest fear was going through all of that, and that my biggest fear in that moment was going through all of that by myself,
Right.
And just feeling so alone and isolated. So that was definitely a big piece of it. And then the scanning the horizon, I see that happen to me in a couple of different ways. Is I can look ahead and think, okay, what's going to happen that's likely going to be negative.
Yep.
But another piece of this that I notice, especially at work, is feeling like I need to have control of the situation to be able to avoid something negative that could happen.
Okay. And I can definitely see that. I've talked with another friend who happens to be a six, and that control can be overwhelming, especially if you're thrown off schedule, or you're thrown off a routine, or you initially, like you kind of hinted at, you've thought through things and you've kind of laid out a pathway for things to happen. And then when that doesn't happen, or if something kind of jumbles that whole plan all up, you all become very hyper vigilant in that control state to try to get it back to zero, so to speak. So what type of situations do you find yourself in where you get that stressful, I'm going to start being controlling? And it's almost like you all morph into an eight. Is the conversation I had with her is you become domineering. You become very direct, very the ability to be very pointed. What type of situations kind of bring you to that state?
So for me, I definitely notice again at work, when it's something that comes to like the safety of children, like if we're organizing a trip. I think months ago, we talked about a trip where we were taking a large group of students out of state. Yeah. And so I signed up to be part of that, but it's like I wanted full control because I knew what I needed to do to keep them safe. And it was doubting everybody else.
Right.
Not that they weren't qualified, but I didn't know or understand their thought process. And so a lot of times I notice it is something at work when it involves like the safety of other people, and I feel responsible for that.
And that makes sense. And even as I lead right into this, so the psychological defense or the defense mechanism of a six is to project. And you're projecting in order to maintain that self-image of being who you are, of being loyal, to make sure you're attributing to the good of others, to your students, right? Like you mentioned. And they come out both positive and negatively. But where do you find yourself? Is it projecting onto others when you're in that out of control state, or you're projecting onto others because you're anxious about something, or you're projecting onto others because you don't trust what's happening around you? Is it one or the other, or is it all three?
I would say probably a combination, but the lack of trust is probably the biggest piece of that.
Okay. Why does the lack of trust kind of make you, we called it in our marriage group, assume aside? I'm assuming this is going to happen, so therefore I'm going to project that. I'm going to put out my misgivings or mistrustings out in the atmosphere. Like, what is it about the trust factor that kind of sends you on that tailspin?
I do think it's it's just what you said, it's the assuming. And sometimes it's not even a logical thought process, like assuming that somebody hasn't had the experience necessary to make the right decision, or doesn't have such a diligent thought process. And there's a lot of times nothing that is proving that to me. It's just like this gut feeling or reaction that I need to step in and at least explain myself and why every step that I have created in my game plan is the best step to follow.
Okay. And so with that being said, because sixes have trouble with authority, right? They have trouble trusting people whom are supposed to be in charge because you think you've done all the thought provoking problem solving that needs to happen. And of course they haven't. How do you find that in relationships? Do you find yourself butting heads with people because you kind of come off as, I don't trust anything you're saying? Like, what does that look like in relationships for you? Do you feel like that's a struggle point for you and others?
With certain relationships, yes. Other people have definitely like built that trust, and I'm able to take in what they have to say for what it is and try to apply it, where other people I'm a little more guarded with.
Okay.
I do find some people I may be a little more confrontational with than others, and I'm not exactly sure what that divider is, or like why that line is drawn with some people and not others.
Okay.
But it's definitely there.
Okay. So what's one of the best things you believe you bring to the table in a relationship then? What is it that Jen offers to a relationship?
I do go back to the loyal piece,
Okay.
that I really am always there, and that I will, continue to try to work through whatever problem there is, to maintain that whatever the relationship is.
Okay. And so then on the other side of that, what are you looking for in relationships from people? What is something that if I'm going to be spending time with someone, what is it that you're seeking out of that?
That's a good question. I think I always want people to be equally as loyal.
Okay.
And a lot of times, there's a disappointment there,
Yeah. Yeah.
but it's also not communicated. And so there's this expectation that I have set that nobody else can read my mind.
Interesting.
Um,
It was going
so
to
then
be,
there's the
yeah.
built up disappointment.
Okay. Okay. Because that was going to be my next piece of that is it hard to tell people that? In this case, you're saying you don't even tell them at all and you just expect it, but they don't know it.
Yeah, I would say in most cases, yes.
Okay.
And a
Okay.
lot of times, there might be situations that will build up for me. And a lot of times I still don't communicate. Like I just try to let it go without sharing that with the other person.
Okay. Okay. So hopping right over to the triads, let's see, you're in the head triad, five, sixes, and sevens. So you pick up on the IQ portion of each of the versus gut or heart. So you all are in the head triad where you stay in your head, you're thinking things through. Your emotional struggle, like we just talked about, is fear, but for a six, it specifically is actual fear, actual anxiety. These numbers have a desire for security, and you're thinking in balance because you're always in your head. So it's hard for you sometimes to look at impact, and it's hard for you sometimes to actually do. And from talking to you so far, it sounds like you have a pretty good process for you to go do some action. But I didn't necessarily hear from you that you kind of review your emotions and look at the impact of things. Is that a struggle point for you? Because I know in talking to my other friend who's a six, sometimes they have trouble connecting to their emotions and then being able to express that to other people. Is that something that you find yourself having trouble doing?
I think sometimes I do feel so stuck in my head that I don't necessarily feel the emotion. It's just like nothing but overthinking and overanalyzing and trying to figure out exactly how I feel.
Yeah.
But other times I feel like there's like what's the word I'm looking for? How I want to explain it. Like I almost feel too deeply with certain things.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So it seems like it's like one way or the other.
Okay.
And
Okay.
I
So,
don't know if maybe feeling too deeply is after I have spent endless hours or days over analyzing something and then the emotion comes out. So it's almost like working to pull that emotion out.
okay. Okay. I mean, no, that makes sense. So, that you have to kind of think your way to your emotion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Like even for me, I know I have to stop and like name my emotions and like go on the emotion wheel and be like, oh, do I feel this way? Do I feel that way? No, don't feel that way. Don't feel that way. And it's almost like a process of elimination for me. But what it sounds like for you, and I know for other numbers too, even for like a 5, you all think your emotions first. You're like, I'm sad. Like,
Mm-hmm.
right, you said it. I think I'm sad.
Mm-hmm.
And because sometimes you make the statement, you almost forget sometimes to feel it and then express it. Is that
Right.
something?
It's like not processing properly.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, okay. And then also even for um, the 7, you go to your stressor number is a 1. So the perfectionist, the reformer, the fixer, so to speak, critical judge sometimes. Um, what types of situations cause you to go to that stressful state? And then what does that look like for you?
I think it goes back again to it's sort of linked to the fear of
Okay.
somebody or group of people that I care about who could end up in a situation that I could prevent for them or help them get through, if that makes sense, to protect them in some way.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
That makes sense. That's a little different. I don't think I've ever heard a 6 explain it that way. It's almost like a gut triad thing, our desire for justice, right? But I guess that would kind of make sense, especially if you go to that 1. You're seeking out, you want to ensure that you protect your loved ones, and therefore utilizing that problem solving that 6s do in order to come up with a plan, to your point, to prevent things from happening. So I guess maybe it's I guess it sounds like more the inability to control a particular situation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Stress out.
But going to that point about perfectionism, it's like if I come up with a perfect plan,
Okay.
we're preventing, that whatever I'm fearing in that moment.
Oh, okay. Okay. I get you. I get it. I get it. And then, okay, wow. Got it. So, so do you ever see that being a rub with others, or where you butt heads when you start to go to that state? How does the interaction start to play out?
Like you mentioned before, I think when it comes to then dealing with authority on whatever that level is, and
Yeah.
if we aren't seeing eye to eye,
Mm-hmm.
I'm someone again, like I think I mentioned before, that when I feel a certain way and I feel strongly about it, I'm not going to let it go or be unheard.
Mm,
Um,
okay.
that's when I become more vocal and
Mm.
I don't know if aggressive is the right word, but maybe assertive.
Well, assertive and rebellious, right? So we did talk about that for a 6. So you become that rebellious. I'm going to do um, exactly the opposite to prove that I'm not afraid, which is the counterphobic 6, which is funny. We mentioned that a little bit earlier when we first got started. So the counterphobic 6 will do exactly the opposite of, instead of shrinking back and instead of not engaging for fear of things that may happen, the counterphobic 6 will rush towards those situations and rush towards, to your point, being more vocal, being more assertive, and saying, nope, this is what I'm going to do in order to prove that I don't have fear and prove that this fear is not stopping me. Is that where you find yourself more on the shrinking back side or more on the rushing towards side?
I would say probably the rushing toward.
Okay. Okay. And that's a counterphobic 6. So that's that's interesting. That's very interesting. And then on the other opposite side of that, when do you find yourself more comfortable, more in a relaxed state, which would be you going to your 5 and kind of being calm and being able to indulge in information and books and being more competent and being more sound, grounded. Where do you, or excuse me, you know what? You're not a 7. I don't know why my brain went to 7. So now I need to relook at this. That was my fault. I'm looking at the 7, knowing you're a 6. You actually go to a 9. The 9, yes, to the 9. When you're in a growth state, not a 5, excuse me. So going to a 9 in a growth state, and a 3 in a stressful state, which would be more going towards things, because that's what 3s are. They're achievers. They're very go-getters. And so, excuse me, when I said that about the 1, you do not become the perfectionist. You become the go-getter and the successful achiever, the person that needs to become who they need to become, like you were saying about protecting your loved ones and becoming the person that you need to be in order to run towards that. So, excuse me, listeners, that is the 3. The 6s go to a 3 in a stressful state, and then you go to a 9 in a growth state, which is to be the peacemaker and to be calm and to be very open to various perspectives. So you're not as suspicious and not as cautious around people, but you're more open to hearing what they have to say and more open to what they may bring to the table without considering them to be, kind of wonky. When do you find yourself in the most comfortable or the most kind of calm state for yourself?
I would say in one of 2 spaces. One, when I'm with the people that I'm closest to, so whether that be family or close friends, and normally takes me a long time before I feel like I'm very close to somebody.
Okay.
But those are kind of like my trusted people that I feel really comfortable with. Yeah. I do this too, and I don't know if this makes sense or not, but when I travel, there's like a sense of calm for me.
Oh, okay.
I don't know. I find that interesting because there are so many fears that could be like linked to travel. But I don't know if it's like a sense of freedom from like daily fears that I would normally have.
That's kind of what I was getting ready to kind of say, that you're not trying to control the scope of things per se, versus you're relaxed and you're enjoying yourself and you're kind of going with the flow. But I know my other 6 says if they do travel, they're definitely planning out everything in advance. Do you feel like that will be is that something that you do before you travel, or do you kind of literally really go to that 9 and you're like, whatever you guys want to do, let's just have fun?
Yeah. It's kind of crazy. Like the switch just flips, and I'm very like I'm so regimented in normal life as far as like making sure things are done or trying to work towards things. But when I go on vacation, it's like whoever I'm with, like you can decide. I'm go with the flow. Like I don't care if we're doing nothing or we're doing everything, and it is just like a very calming.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It's nice that travel does that, because I know for others that does the complete opposite effect, especially because they're like, are we going to be okay? What are we going to eat? Is our hotel going to be all right? And what if we get kidnapped and they put us to the trafficking trade and no one ever sees us again? Like, right? They go in this crazy like loop. So that's cool that you definitely really live in that 9 in your travel state. That's cool.
I've been in situations where I probably should have been scared.
Been more worried.
Right. It's just, I don't know. There's definitely a sense of calm when I'm traveling.
Okay. Cool. So let's look at stances. So stances are how we perceive it through our dominant center. And again, you're in the head triad, but you process through your non-repressed center. So for you as a 6, 1, 2s, and 6s are present-oriented. You're compliant, kind of like you were just saying, go along with the flow of things, especially, which is kind of opposite in a stressful state. You kind of come to the conclusion like, well, whatever you want to do, and you kind of stop and become dutiful, as they also refer to it. 1s, 2s, and 6s, as a 6, you internalize, so you're more apt to push it down, not act like it doesn't exist, but you push it down. Like you swallow your words, you swallow your emotions versus externalizing it like I would do. You're thinking repressed in the sense like we just kind of talked through what that looked like. So you process through feeling and doing. Because when you ruminate and you stay in your head, it's hard to actually process what it is that you need to think through. And then for the sixes, they have a struggle to self-evaluate and really self-reflect and see what it is that they really, how they feel and what's going on with them. And they struggle to see that, especially with others. So what do you think about these pieces here?
I certainly internalize, like overthinking to the max and keeping a lot of it to myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that kind of matches with the struggle to self-evaluate.
Okay.
And, I've probably learned in the last 6 months that the key to that is in friendships, and having somebody that you trust that you can go to and explain the situation and have them kind of work through it with you.
Okay, that makes sense. And I also said present oriented. So present oriented for a 1, 2, or 6 means you're focused in the right now, in the moment. So you don't like necessarily looking at the past, and you don't necessarily refer to the future. So do you feel like that's something that you do? Everything is, but what's happening right now and what's in front of me, and I need to address this right here. Do you find yourself in that frame of mind?
No, I think for myself, a lot of times I'm looking at the past.
Okay.
Focusing on the past. And there's certainly times where, I'm hopeful and looking ahead as well. But there are a lot of situations that I think I do focus on the past more. I think a lot of times I struggle in being present.
Okay. So that's different. So yeah, and that's probably, if we looked at the subtypes, we would kind of look at why that might be a little bit different for you. So that's good to hear from someone differently. And like I mentioned, 3, 6, and 9s are dominant and repressed in the same center. These 3 types are often most out of touch with their own core sense of self, and that's you kind of hit on that. What do others find frustrating about you?
Probably, I'm sure that people get frustrated when I'm like over analyzing or overthinking, and you get to that point where I think about it so much in my mind, and then it's like, okay, I'm going to start reaching out to people and explaining this over and over and over and over again.
Yeah.
There's frustration on their end with that. Also, if I'm not being assertive in how I feel about a certain situation, there's definitely a part of me that I think can be passive aggressive rather than going like at it head on and just saying, this is what I'm struggling with, this is what we need to work through. But avoidance is also a piece of that too. Like I'd rather just avoid talking to somebody about a specific topic until enough time has passed that we don't need to revisit it.
I'll just wait you out.
Right. And I can wait for a long time.
For a long time. And so how do you get out of that? Because that has to be a struggle for, in a relationship. Mm-hmm. When you kind of take that stance, like how do you bust out of that?
I think in most cases I need to be pushed out of it. Like the other person just continues to pursue a conversation or pushes me to the point of like, hey, I know that things aren't right and we need to talk through something, or I don't know what's bothering you. So it's normally the other person who ends up bringing it up and kind of pulling that out of me.
Okay. And so even with that being said, outside of frustrating, how do you often feel misunderstood? Where's an area where you find yourself having to re-explain yourself?
I think I pick things that I can sometimes like care obsessively about.
Okay.
So in a lot of cases, somebody else might just be able to let it go. Like And I keep going back to work, but like the idea of, you come home from work and you leave work at work.
Okay.
That's normal for me. And so I think people have a hard time understanding, like, why can't you just follow that rule?
Yeah.
Or why can't you like just stop thinking about it?
Yeah.
Whatever the topic may be, just turn it off, go do something else, go have fun, go be happy. It's not always that easy.
Yeah. Because it's a struggle for you guys to not kind of replay it in your head, right? And then give it the worst case scenario look of it, right?
Well, and every time you replay it in your head, whatever emotion you're feeling gets amplified more
Right.
and more, right? So
Yeah.
you're getting more upset. You're getting more upset typically in one way or another.
Yeah. And then even try not to border on paranoia, right? At that point, like you don't, because as we ruminate things in our mind, as it goes around the cycle or the Ferris wheel, so to speak, it seems to get realer and realer to us, right? And definitely having those close relationships and having those people to help talk us out of that and push us out of that, as you were saying, is definitely needed because we can't do life alone. That's for sure. That's right. For sure. Yeah. So I want to move to my last piece here and just share with people, how do we really start to relate to a 6 and how do we really connect to them? So number one, to create rapport, appreciate their attention to problems, and agree on rules and procedures. You agree? Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Try to avoid changing the rules abruptly or withholding information or discounting their concerns. So never tell a 6, not that again, it's not that serious, because that's going to amplify, to your point again, their concerns and their anxieties. So join them in acknowledging what could go wrong before moving ahead. So acknowledge that, hey, I see that you think that this could be something that could go wrong, but here's all the reasons why it could go right. And then here is even, let's hear, or can you tell me like your prevention plan would be probably another good follow-up to go with a 6. To handle conflict, put your cards on the table as much as possible. Don't be ambiguous. Challenge them to take responsibility for their reactions instead of coming up with external reasons. Refuse to take on their projections. This is how we have to help you, right? Help the 6s. When they feel threatened, they may be antagonistic or withdraw, and that's that 5 wing in them. And at times they're testing others to see if they will prove reliable. So do you find yourself, especially when conflict is happening, doing any of those things?
Yes, I definitely think like testing others for sure.
Yeah. And support their growth. Help 6s to face their fears directly. Get reality checks and ask for personal support. And you mentioned that, having those friends, having those relationships and those friendships. When possible, get them to see the humor in situations and provide enough safety to get them to relax their mental scanning that they're doing, right? Scanning that horizon. So that they can get more into their bodies and into their feelings and out of their head. That's where we want to get 6 out of their head. And the higher growth transformation for a 6 is to sustain faith in other people. And that's that trust, that removing that lack of suspicion and that perspective that life is dynamic, right? It's not static. It doesn't stay in place. And there's always changes, and being more flexible and adaptable to overcome that mind-body split and get out of the head. So what's one thing that you particularly would offer to your friends or family or people who might listen to this to help a 6 out? What are some things that they could do better to help relate with you?
Sure. I think it's interesting to try to avoid withholding information. I think that's a fine line.
Okay.
Sometimes there's too much information and it becomes overwhelming. But you still want to be in the know. So I think figuring out what that fine line is for each 6 is probably very individual. But also just being forthcoming and pushing to try to understand where they're coming from. is a huge piece. You know, if I'm fearful or anxious about something, but keeping that to myself and you can sense that, or there's some type of tension in a
Okay.
relationship, um, just, trying to have an active conversation sooner rather than later, or pushing for that conversation to happen.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for stopping by with me. Um, I really appreciate all your insight. And again, sorry, listeners, for that hiccup with I don't know why my brain went to 7 for a minute there when we were looking at where you go in your stress and your growth number. But for a 6, it's the triangle, 9, 6, and 3. So you all share those growth and stress numbers together. But until next time, this is Joanie Bop with On Purpose Coaching, where we challenge you to do better on purpose. Thank you for tuning in to On Purpose Coaching with your coach, Joanie Bop. Make sure to subscribe down there in the right-hand corner and like my videos if they made an impact on you today. Visit my website, onpurposeplanningandconsulting.com, and sign up for your next step in practical improvement. Use code Enneagram for 50% off a one-time coaching session until the end of July this year. Believe me, it will be worth every penny. Again, thank you for listening today to On Purpose Coaching, where we challenge you to do better on purpose.